be sure to register for the 10-week online course that I teach on Saturdays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968, because we deal with a lot of this information. We deal with a lot of this information we talked about here and go deep into it. Each class we go through and analyze approximately a 10-year period of history. We look at a timeline of history. We look at chronology from, we look at some history leading up to the Civil War taking place. We start with the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, which ties into the Haitian Revolution as well. And then we go through history and we look at the Civil War, Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. We look at the Jim Crow era, where they're rewriting state constitutions, and we see an increase in domestic terrorism against African Americans, an increase in lynchings and things like this. And the South is trying to totally take back control of the state legislatures and the local governments and all of this, and they're instituting segregation. You see segregation on streetcars and trains and things like this. You see this in the 1880s. Okay, in Florida is going to be the first state to have. Florida is going to be the first state to have poll taxes in 1889. It's going to be Florida. And then we're going to see this adopted by other states also. Okay. Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, things like this. All right. So just a few of the things that we deal with in the class. We go through and look at a chronology of history. And just a few of the things we look at is the Civil War, why it was fought. We look at the assassination of Lincoln, Special Field Order number 15, 40 acres and a mule. We look at the and how that land was taken back as well, and what Special Field Order number 15 actually was, what 40 acres and a mule actually was. It was 400,000 acres of land. It was coastal land in South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. Coastal land in South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. It didn't apply to it wasn't land that went to all the former slaves. It wasn't land in all of the South. Okay, that's not what it was. And then we deal with how that land was taken back. The majority of that land was taken back also. We deal with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the passage of the 13th Amendment and ratification of the 13th Amendment as well. The Reconstruction era and African Americans making advances in acquiring land, HBCUs being built. All this taking place during the Reconstruction era. You're going to have about 2,000 African Americans voted into elected office and into state legislatures. We look at the Louisiana Purchase that doubled the territory of the U.S., and they got about 828,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre from France, and France stole it from Native Americans and African people who were already here. We look at the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, which leads to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, which ends the Mexican-American War. And we see how all these events that maybe we learned about in school, when we go through and look at it chronologically, we see how these events lead to other events. One of the things that leads to the Civil War taking place is the Mexican-American War, and the U.S. is going to get California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah, and Nevada as a result of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ends the Mexican-American War. And then you're going to have what's known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act leads up to the people moving out to that new land, those new territories. It leads up to them to determine whether or not they're going to have slavery. And this infuriates a lot of abolitionists, helps to intensify the abolitionist movement. And as a direct result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, you're going to have the Republican Party founded in 1854. Founded by groups of abolitionists, and you can have some members of the Whig Party as well, who are going to form the Republican Party to be the counter to the Democratic Party at the time. This is before the party realignment takes place that's completed in the 1960s, but starts with the Lily White movement in 1928. Okay, which we deal with. That's a whole nother thing. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, then Bleeding Kansas, Armed which is armed conflict between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups in the Kansas Territory from about 1855 to 1859. You're going to have about 55 people who are killed between pro-slavery groups and anti-slavery groups. Manifest Destiny is this ideology fueling a lot of this. And Manifest Destiny is in U.S. history is the supposed inevitability of the continued territorial expansion of the boundaries of the United States westward to the Pacific Ocean and beyond. Before the U.S. Civil War, 1861 to 1865, the idea of Manifest Destiny was used to validate continental acquisitions in the Oregon Territory or Oregon Country. Texas, which comes into the Union in 1845, Texas wins its independence from Mexico in 1836. Mexico wins its independence from Spain around 1821. New Mexico and California are going to come into the Union as a result of the Mexican-American War. Texas comes into the Union as a slaveholding state in 1845, which has a lot to do with what's going on in Texas right now in the history of Texas, and it's encoded in their state constitution of 1876. Now, the purchase of Alaska after the Civil War briefly revived the concept of Manifest Destiny, but it most evidently became a renewed force in U.S. foreign policy in the 1890s when the country went to war with Spain, the Spanish-American War of 1898, which we talk about, the Spanish-American War of 1898. And that war we see that as the backdrop in the movie Posse, which stars Mario Van Peebles and Melvin Van Peebles. Melvin Van Peebles just passed away because that war, that movie Posse takes place in 1898, which is when the Spanish-American War started. Okay, and that's over a territorial dispute as well. All right, and what actually the U.S. gets involved. Actually, Cuba is fighting against Spain over. Cuba is trying to win their independence from Spain. Cuba, being a colony of Spain, goes back to Cuba being conquered by Christopher Columbus in 1492 for the Spanish crown, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. So Cuba is going to war with Spain for their independence, and the U.S. gets involved in that war, the Spanish-American War. That is the backdrop to the movie Posse. That's the war that's taking place there. When it opens, it talks about 1898 and the Spanish-American War. So all this is connected. All this history is connected. It's connected to movies that we see, things like this. One of the things we talk about is the Kansas Exodus, the Black Exodus to Kansas of 1879. After the Louisiana state elections of 1878, where Democrats take back control of political offices and statewide elections and the governorship. This is going to cause an exodus from Louisiana and Texas, largely, especially Louisiana, of about 6,000 African Americans who go into Kansas in 1879 looking for a better way of life. If you saw the movie Buck and the Preacher from the 1970s with Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte and Ruby Dee, and it's about a wagon train of African Americans going out to the Kansas Territory, former slaves going out to the Kansas Territory. That movie, the setting takes place a few years before the Black Exodus of 1879. But African Americans were going out to the Kansas Territory before 1879. It's the same theme in the movie, but you're going to have a mass influx in 1879 going into Kansas. But it's the same thing. They're going, they want to acquire land, looking for a better way of life, escaping white supremacy and former slave owners, things like this, in southern states that they came from. It's the same thing. Okay, so these are just a few of the things that we deal with in the class. And we go through a chronology of history, and we go through the Jim Crow era. We talk about June 19th, 1865, Juneteenth. We talk about 40 Acres and a Mule. We deal with the Freedmen's Bureau, the Freedmen's Bank, the collapse of the Freedmen's Bank in 1874, $2.9 million worth of African Americans deposits were lost when the Freedmen's Bank collapsed in 1874. 14th Amendment, we go through all this history. Sarah Rector and the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866 and the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887. And Sarah Rector became the richest Afro-American girl. They called her Afro-American, early 1900s. Okay, richest Afro-American girl in the early 1900s when oil is discovered on land that she got and her family got because of the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866. And she was born on Creek Indian land, and her parents were of enslaved Creek Indian ancestry because the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians all owned African slaves. They get pushed off their land in southeastern United States because of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson. His Secretary of War was Lewis Cass, that Cass Technical High School here in Detroit is named after, because Lewis Cass was a white supremacist also. And a third of the people on the Trail of Tears were African people. Lewis Cass helped engineer this genocide on not just Native Americans, but also African people. That's why Cass Technical High School needs to be named after somebody else, needs to be named after an African American freedom fighter, not after a white supremacist who oppressed African Americans. So we talk about Sarah Rector. Now, Sarah Rector and the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866 and the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 plays into the history of Tulsa, Oklahoma, because Tulsa was founded by Creek Indians around 1834 when they get pushed off their land in southeastern United States because of the Indian Removal Act, and they go into Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they take their African slaves with them. And Tulsa comes from the word Tulsa comes from the Creek Indian word Talasi. So there weren't just Native Americans in Oklahoma. There was also African people in Oklahoma as well, African Americans. And you're going to people classified as Black Indians. All this is going on in Oklahoma. A lot of the early African American landowners in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Black Wall Street is, a lot of them got land because of the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 and the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866. That plays into the origins of Tulsa, Oklahoma and Black Wall Street. Okay, so we deal with all this, and we go through we look at the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, the Force Acts, and we look at the Reconstruction era, and we look at the Jim Crow era and things like the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890. We look at things like the Vicksburg Massacre of 1874 and the Colfax Massacre of 1873, Opelousas Massacre of 1868. We look at these massacres, these attacks on African Americans exercising their right to vote, voting people into office. The retaliation is going to be domestic terrorism against African Americans to keep us from voting. We're going to see this during Reconstruction. Then in South Carolina, was the first state to secede from the Union, December 20 of 1860. And South Carolina was also where the Civil War starts, April 12, 1861. The domestic terrorism in South Carolina got so bad that President Ulysses S. Grant in 1871 had to declare martial law in 9 counties in South Carolina using the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, which is still on the books right now, even though part of it was struck down around 1883 by the U.S. Supreme Court. But that law is still on the books right now, still being used. And one of the examples of how it's being used is against another domestic terrorist, insurrectionist, Donald Trump, because recently there was a lawsuit filed by Capitol Hill police officers because of the January 6th insurrection that Donald Trump led, incited, and told them to go to the U.S. Capitol building. He was the one who sent the hitmen. So you don't just prosecute the hitmen and put them in prison. You prosecute the person who sent the hitmen. That was Trump. Well, there was a lawsuit, and we talked about it here on this show, to show you how all this history is connected. Capitol Hill police officers filed a lawsuit against Trump. Let's see if we can pull this article up here. They filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump using the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. Let's see here. Okay, there was what is this the I think there was one more recently than April. Let's see here. Also, Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi filed a lawsuit as well against Trump and some of the other insurrectionists, leaders of the insurrection. Let me see something here. There was one. Hold on. Okay, this one right here. New York Times. This is an example. This is from the New York Times. Capitol police officers sue Trump and allies over election lies in January 6th. The suit, which took a broad view of the riot's origins, was the latest effort to hold former President Donald Trump accountable for the January 6th Capitol attack. This is from April 26, 2021. Okay. The lawsuit implicated members of the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, militia, and Donald Trump associates. Roger Stone was arguably the most expansive civil effort to date, seeking to hold Donald Trump and his allies legally accountable for the storming of the U.S. Capitol. With three other similar lawsuits, while three other similar lawsuits were filed in recent months, the suit on Thursday in April 2021 was the first to allege that Donald Trump worked in concert with both far-right extremists and political organizers promoting his baseless lies that the presidential election was marred by fraud. Now, the suit contends that Donald Trump and his co-defendants violated the Ku Klux Klan Act, an 1871 statute that includes protections against violent conspiracies that interfere with Congress's constitutional duties and duties of elected officials, because there were so many elected officials getting attacked and killed during Reconstruction that they had to pass these force acts. And the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 is the third of 4 force acts. And this gives the president authority to declare martial law because of domestic terrorism. Okay. Now the law has been weakened since 1871, but this is what Ulysses S. Grant did in 9 counties in South Carolina because they were attacking African-American elected officials and white Republicans who were allies of African-Americans, things like this, attacking them, beating them up, killing them, things like this. Okay, so these are just a few of the things that we deal with in the class. And we talk about the state constitutions and how they were rewritten to impose white supremacy, codify white supremacy, and take back control of state legislatures and elected office, etc. Okay, and the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890, that was the model that other states are going to use. It was called the Mississippi Plan. And Solomon Saladin Calhoun, who was the white county judge that presided over the Mississippi State Convention, said, we came here to exclude the Negro. said it explicitly why they were there. We came here to exclude the Negro. All right, look, so that's just a sample of some of the things we deal with in the class. Okay, so you can visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register for the 10-week online course. As soon as you register, you can start watching content you watched last week's class. And we do this class on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We go through and analyze approximately a 10-year period of history each class. We'll post a link here. You can register for it. And it's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And another class that I teach is on Sundays, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This one, we deal with thousands of years of history. We deal with ancient Africa and Ghana, Songhai, Mali, the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. We do this on Sundays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. And then we deal with what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place and go through study that. So from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement, that picks up basically where understanding the transatlantic slave trade leaves off. All right. We have to get out of here. Remember, the African History Network, we focus on educating. Oh, and also right here, Friday, October 15th through Sunday, October 17th, the Social Justice Conference at Hartford Memorial Baptist Church, the Social Justice Conference. Keynote speaker on Saturday, the keynote speaker will be Minnesota Minnesota State Attorney General Keith Ellison, who led the prosecution of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. Visit the website hmbcdetroit.org. That's for Hartford Memorial Baptist Church, hmbcdetroit.org. Tickets are $25. Tickets are $25. You can register at the door. They're saying we're going to have some more information for you. They have workshops that Saturday, October 16th. I'll be doing one of the workshops. This year's theme is the Black Church, from my understanding. I'm going to get some more details, some more information. I've spoken here a few times in the past. They had me speak there. They had me do workshops and participate in their social justice conference. They'll have vendors there on Saturday also. I'll be a vendor as well. We'll have a vendor booth for the African History Network. So we'll post this link here. Okay. And it's going to be really, really good. And we'll get to hear from Keith Ellison also. And we'll post the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, about it as well. Okay. All right. We have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time. Talk to you on Sunday.